Hello and welcome to the fourth edition of Res Forum Live. As advertised, our focus today will be on how GM leaders are responding to the current challenges and opportunities provided not just by COVID-19, but by the rapid changes in the wider spheres of business and society. We will hear how those leaders, corporate, technical and academic, are addressing these issues with their policies in practice by developing resilient, sustainable and flexible approaches to global mobility. My name is John Devitt and I will be hosting this show for the next 75 minutes or so. We have about 100 people registered to join us, so we should have a lot of great participation. I will be bringing it all together here in our studio, which is just outside Oxford in the United Kingdom. But to kick off, let's turn to David Enser. David, of course, is the Res Forum's managing partner, and he will set the context for today's event. David.
Now, as John said, with today's event, we want to share and we want to glean insights, as always, with the Res Forum. It's about sharing and helping each other draw confidence, I think, from that we're not facing the challenges of today alone. However, I think today we also want to try to go beyond COVID, which has obviously dominated the news for many months now and affected our roles and flipped our day-to-day work on its head. And in doing so, we want to try to explore some of the other challenges and pressures being placed upon us. Now, the question in particular that I would like to explore today is how will global mobility as an enabler of workforce diversity survive in a post-COVID era? And linked to this, we'll be exploring three future essentials for any GM program, in my opinion: resilience, sustainability, and flexibility. Now, just to explain what I mean a little bit by that, resilience, for me, it means organizations developing positions and programs and ethics and value positions to be able to continue to operate internationally, not just during a pandemic, but when faced with so many other issues: environmental impact of global mobility, social justice issues, ethical working practices, BLM, gender pay, gender and leadership representation, the concept of local versus international talent development. How do these diverse influences succeed in and influence HR, talent and GM practices? With sustainability, what I mean is, of course, the question, is GM sustainable? Does it have a future? Can cross-border movement of staff, for whatever reason, be that filling skills gaps or developing talent, still be justified? Is there still a place in, a value in having a leadership cadre with international experience as our world, arguably in the last few months, has somewhat shrunk and contracted? And what, of course, again, sustainability, what are the environmental impact of global mobility? Particularly on that topic, and following our last report, which was published in June 2020, I'm very keen to hear people's views throughout the course of this session. And lastly, flexibility. What do I mean by this? Well, in our last Res Forum Live session, about 6 to 7 weeks ago, we explored this concept of the mobility of people versus the mobility of work, how organizations can leverage local versus international talent, is this concept of moving the work rather than the people here to stay? We have a piece of upcoming research on this. We're seeing an enormous amount of thinking already being poured into all sorts of new employment constructs for cross-border work. Virtual assignments, hybrid assignments, remote working, developing highly collaborative global teams that work across borders but don't necessarily travel or work face-to-face. So the question remains, are these kind of working practices here to stay? Have we seen the end of the traditional assignment? And if so, what kind of flexibility can employers build into their value proposition to continue to position themselves as attractive employers and attract and retain the candidate profiles that they need to succeed themselves? So before we go too much further, maybe, Ken, I'd like to do a quick spot poll here, if we may. There should be a polling question popping up on your screen any second now. And we'll perhaps try and return to this question at the end to see if views change over the during the course of the event. So as you can see here, looking ahead over the next 12 to 18 months, which of these do you think best represents the likely future shape of GM programs? Option 1, an eventual return to work to broadly pre-crisis size and mix of programs. Option 2, a somewhat changed model, fewer assignments, but a greater focus on fit-for-purpose business-driven assignments. Thirdly, a radically changed model with a very flexible mix of virtual assignments, remote working, cross-border teams, and development of local talent. Option 4 is a significant reduction in mobility overall, or perhaps there's an other. And yet, let's give that a second and see if the results come in. Now, at the same time, while those results are processing, before we go too much further into the agenda, I'd like to just quickly switch over to David Schofield of Res Forum, and he's going to give us a brief overview on Res Forum and what's going on in the world of GM. Over to you, David.
Thanks very much, David. There's a great deal of activity in the Res Forum and, of course, the wider GM world at present. So here, very quickly, are the headlines. On analytics, we at the Res Forum are continuing to data-led insights into GM. For example, we're adding an extra section into what's an industry-acknowledged standard risk tool to cover pandemic and major incident response. We're amending our policy tools for LTA, business commuter, and STA benchmarking to gather more details on post-COVID GM policies. We will circulate a link soon after this event, and do please take a look. On research, directed by leading academics Dr. Michael Dickman and Dr. Ben Barder, in collaboration with our technical partners, we're finalising an extensive programme of research for the rest of the year and into 2021. This will be covering up-to-the-minute topics such as effective resourcing of assignment types and global work post-COVID, and on shaping the new normal. On sustainability, flexibility, and resilience in GM, we'll be hearing from Michael and Ben later in today's event. On Res Forum's Connected GM initiative, excitingly, we're now live with our collaboration with INEO Mobility on developing digital solutions for GM, and we'll circulate a link with more information after this event. And we'd love you to sign up for some updates and to join the debate about digital GM, which is very active at the moment, and you'll be able to do this by the same link that we will send you. Actually, talking about our technical partner INEO, they're holding the latest annual Mobility, Tax, Legal and Payroll webinar tomorrow, 16th September, and also on 8 October. There was a link to that in the Res Forum newsletter issued to everyone last Friday. That's a paid-for event, but INEO have kindly provided a limited number of free registrations for Res members. So for the chance to obtain that benefit, please follow that link. The webinars will be addressing a range of current topics, including the significant mobility tax and payroll issues for tax year 2020, year-end best practices and tax consideration, and the CARES Act and its effect on the mobility industry. Finally, for me, in these brief news headlines, I want to mention the Res Forum Strategic Advisory Board. This is now up and running as an exclusive senior group comprising GM, talent and reward leaders across the industry sectors. The board gives members an excellent confidential forum to share with peers GM ideas and concerns and to get input on what works and what doesn't. Board members have the right to influence the prioritization of the areas of focus for our research activities. They hear from leading figures from the world in business and politics and get exclusive briefings on important HR topics, such as, well, for example, employment tribunals in relation to international employers. That's an interesting one. Do have a word with me or with David E. if you'd like to know more about the Strategic Advisory Board. Well, that's the end of the brief headlines from me. I guess we want to circle back maybe and pick up on the results of the poll if possible. Okay, well, this is interesting. David Ensor, I don't know if you want to comment on this, but I can see that we have almost a split between answer 2 and answer 3.
That's really fascinating, actually, and we'll see how that evolves later, of course, if we run this poll again. But I think this already is a shift from the last time we asked these questions on our last session, where everybody was predicting a radically changed model with very flexible mix and virtual assignments and remote working, etc. And this seems to say, well, mobility will return, fewer assignments, different constructs and different drivers for assignment. But I think that already constitutes an interesting shift from both the last call as well. And also perhaps somewhat some optimism coming here that mobility is and will continue to return. Mobility as we know it versus the kind of distant collaboration that's taken over our lives for the last few months. That's my interpretation of it, but I'll be keen to see what people think over the course of the event, of course. Now, John, I think we want to flip back to you at this point.
That's absolutely right. Let me talk about how we're going to divide up today's session. It'll comprise of 3 parts. A panel discussion, which will be about 20 minutes long. It will be taking in a broad view and a broad range of voices across global mobility. We will then have a dive into the themes of resilience, sustainability and flexibility, terms you're going to be hearing a little bit more of as we go on. With our academic partners from the Cranfield School of Management and from Newcastle University Business School, along with the Managing Director EMEA of RW3. Now, RW3 are a RES Forum technical partner, and they are experts in building high-performance cross-border teams. Finally, you will be able to come in on all of this with the interactive breakout sessions that we have in every RES Forum Live. They will be facilitated, as usual, by the RES Forum's very own Andrea Piacentini, Jose Segada, and David Schofield. But without further ado, let's move on to our first panel. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined by some excellent panelists, incorporating the supplier side and also the corporate side, who will be sharing their insights and opinions with us. We have Vicky Ng, who's Talent Program Manager North America with Adidas and a social justice advocate. We have Lindsay Hare, who interestingly was one of the first 8 members of RES Forum some time ago. Long-term US resident with a background in D&I and managing major corporate GM programs, most recently as functional lead for a major international bank. We have Isabel Hirsch, CEO of Hirsch Movers, a Swiss-based logistics and art storage company. Now, Isabel took over the family firm with about 130 employees at the age of 28, in what I think we can safely say at that time was a fairly male-dominated environment. And last but not least, we are very delighted to welcome back to RES Forum Live Ginny Di Gregorio, who is a GM expert, director of EY's global PAS business, an international transferee herself, and also a next generation leader at EY. So with those introductions, let me hand over to David Enser to set the scene and to ask the questions of our panel. David.
Now, just to jump straight into it, I wanted to spend a minute or two just to kind of set the scene a little bit for everyone who's joined us today. I've been doing my homework and I came across some interesting insights. There was articles in the Harvard Business Review, the Financial Times, and it was the Financial Times article published on the 27th of August this year that very succinctly asked the question directly, will workforce diversity initiatives survive in a post-COVID era? Now, I personally view global mobility as a huge strategic enabler for organizations that operating across borders, taking a geocentric versus perhaps a very local or ethnocentric approach to international staffing. I think it's been proven to deliver better economic performance for an organization as a whole. And building a diverse international talent pool can also be a really powerful tool, especially as we all look to emerge from the current crisis of the last few months. But the question I ask myself is there still this place for building physical, internationally diverse teams, or will this continue to be replaced by virtual collaboration? Have the days of sending people overseas to export culture come to an end? The article in the FT very interestingly made a distinction or asked the question whether organizations perceive D&I as a nice to have or D&I as a core value. This is something that Lindsay, you and I were of course arguing about last night. Can it even still be afforded? Can organizations still afford the cost of and accept the risk, albeit hopefully temporarily, of more complex travel or overseas postings? There was a McKinsey report in May this year that reported that 27% of organizations have put most or all diversity initiatives on hold. And yet at the same time, the chief diversity officer of Facebook recently said that allyship across employee communities worldwide has never been more important to counter rising xenophobia around the world. There's, of course, the financial case for diverse teams. Looking at the US venture capital organizations, the study said that the more homogenous the investors and partners are in these firms, the lower the investment performance, even saying that it reduced economic performance of funds by up to 50% for teams that were all the same background, all the same ethnicity, all the same education. And of course, there's the concept of psychological safety in a COVID and post-COVID era, building this diverse and inclusive working culture. Will organizations in future choose to focus their efforts on regional or local issues versus global issues? And what does that mean for developing global versus local talent in future? So with that in mind, getting straight into it, I'd like to put my first question perhaps to Lindsay, if I may. So Lindsay, how have you seen organizations responding to this concept of flexibility and the in need of meeting requests for cross-border and working from home in alternative locations? Do you think also that this may or may not be affected by a current push for returning to the office, the return to work?
Yeah, so thanks for inviting me, first of all, and I hope everybody's safe and well. I think what we're really seeing is that we're asking the questions in terms of a duty of care. What are our employees comfortable with? And just for everybody on this call, I'm ex-Santander. I'm actually between positions now because my role was eliminated due to COVID and a restructure. So I'll talk a little bit about Santander and where we were at with that, but also what I've heard from other colleagues in the industry. So it is about the comfort level. I don't think any big company, particularly in financial services, is very interested in bringing people back to work. There's been a lot of surveys to say, what is your comfort? How do you feel? How do your family feel? Are your children going back to school at this point? So I'm not really seeing, definitely in Massachusetts, where we're super safe here, very low in the uptake of COVID. I'm not seeing that push to go back to work, but what I am seeing is companies coming up with a strategy for when people are ready to come back to work. So what we're trying to do, or what we were doing, is really coming up with how are we most comfortable in mobility, keeping people in the location they want to be kept in, not breaking any immigration rules, not breaking any tax rules, not breaking any payroll rules, and really coming up with a best-in-class strategy, really almost on a either business by business case or a location base.
Thank you very much. I mean, I find that fascinating. It certainly stacks up against what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing at this end here in Europe as well. But I guess then it raises this question of, as I said before, is there a future for global talent versus organizations focusing on local talent? Perhaps Vicky, I understand you're with us here. Maybe I could get your perspective on the issue of, is there a place for continuing to develop global talent versus focus on local for the time being?
Yeah, thanks for the question, David, and thank you for having me today. My background is, I started actually with mobility, but my background now is with talent and developing our future talent and HR strategies within Adidas, based in Portland. And I think, taking a step back, when we look at the kind of recent movement around social justice, employees are starting to speak up now and have almost demands from their company. And that is impacting and influencing how companies are developing their strategies around talent. And when we look at global talent versus local talent at Adidas, we're seeing very interestingly more voices from our employees speak up. So when we look at Asia Pacific, one of our key feedback themes were around local employees wanting to be treated the same as expats. We also saw themes around wanting to see more female leadership and also more Asian leadership. And so half of our leaders in Asia Pacific are not Asian or do not have Asian background. And so I think that's something that has been supported by global mobility. And so taking a step back for us as a group to think about is what are the benefits of global mobility and what are the unintended consequences of global mobility? Because historically, this expat culture that we have in Asia Pacific have perpetuated more of a economic disparity between senior leaders who are exported from different countries, not from Asian countries, and then local employees. And now they're almost rising up and saying this is not fair. We want to be paid the same as expats or treated the same as expats. And we also want to have a chance to develop and be put into leadership positions. So you're seeing this trend over the past 5 years where students who used to want to work for Western companies are now going for Asian or Chinese-based companies because they have more of an opportunity there. So I still believe in the value of global mobility. I think it brings diversity, but really what does diversity look like within global mobility? If we're talking about D&I initiatives, does that purely look like expats exporting culture? Or how are we encouraging, I think, diverse talent who want to work for companies and enabling them with the mobility and opportunities to do so? So for example, if you're based in New York, but the diverse talent that you want is, I don't know, located in India and they don't want to move to New York, how are you supporting that within your global mobility policies to allow for that flexibility so that you are able to attract and retain diverse talent no matter where they are?
I think that's fascinating, Vicky. And before I'm going to put another question actually straight back to Lindsay, but it's interesting because I know an organization that they were spending 70% of their, I think the figure was 60 to 70% of their personnel budget in Asia on 7% of their Asian employee base, i.e. the expats. For me, it's a question of budgets, but it's also what does that send as well. So maybe what I'll do, just back to Lindsay again. You had this interesting, as you mentioned, in your last role, this interesting mix of both the head of D&I as well as the head of GM for the region. So from your perspective, do you still think there's a place of value for GM as a builder of diverse global talent pools?
Yeah, absolutely. To the day they put me in the ground, I think we were the first teams that really did help with, moving a diverse pool of talent around. I think there's a challenge with any company as to where they are in their D&I story, as to whether it's a tick the box exercise and something they have to do, or if it's truly embedded in the culture of what they do. So, coming from years and years in financial services, one of the challenges I saw was that, global mobility is very expensive. It's a very expensive thing to take, this individual and their family and move them across the globe and invest in them. And so one of the challenges I've had, not just with Santander, but other companies when I was a consultant, is how do you help influence the leaders and the business to really look at their selection? So, what tends to happen is, that person, it's kind of cooked. We all know this in mobility. It's like you're moving Joe Schmo from here to here, and you're like, within the first 20 minutes of talking to them or their family, you're like, that's the wrong person. They might be the right person to do the job in this country, but the family's not ready, or there's other people that I think will be better for this. So I think, one of the things that, I firmly believe is that if your D&I infrastructure is correct, GM will be a huge part of that influence, because what you'd want to say is, sometimes take the pain out, rather than you as the global mobility person saying, I don't think this is the right person. Use, some tools if you've got the budget to do it, like an RW3, cultural awareness, to try and get that selection process, and then slow it down so that the leaders bring that diverse pool of talent. And then us as leaders in GM, we should be saying, this person is different, right? For me, something I saw was the white male between 30 and 50 with 2.4 children moving here. Like, can we have a Black female that maybe can't do 100% of the position, but maybe she can do 80% and take a chance on her and get her to move? And then, as Vicky was saying, we need those role models that someone can look up to and follow, and that will stop perpetuating the belief that you really do have D&I embedded. So yes, absolutely, I believe it's a key function for us.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'd like to actually turn it over to Ginny now. A similar question, from your view as a consultant working for one of the world's biggest consulting firms, does developing talent internationally still have a place in the budget for global organizations, or will this domestic talent agenda take precedence given that organizations are making some difficult financial choices right now? What's your perspective, Ginny?
Hi, David. Thanks for the question. Look, what I think is that this pandemic crisis and the economical effect and impact that this will have onto the companies nowadays hasn't undermined the importance of the international assignments. Because international assignment, international development and exposure to international culture and other way of operating are still a very, very relevant and importance for global growth and provides a genuine development for the different talents. I think, though, that there is clearly a sort of budget cutoff at the moment. There is companies are very looking into how they're spending and investing their money. And definitely there is now a need to revisit the strategy and how mobility can support the company doing that. And I want to echo what Lindsay said about, for example, let's think about the selection process, right? How can you select the right candidates in a more effective way, take into account also D&I objective? Or, for example, redefine which assignments will still be needed, right? We're evaluating the goals, start looking into the ROI more carefully, see how we can measure return on investment and make this assignment really valid. Understand, for example, if with one assignment you can achieve more goals, right? So refocus the assignment and see if you can go beyond the initial scope. Or also, this is a very, very, very key topics at the moment for us. How can you be more flexible? And for example, with keeping an eye on cost, how can you be very creative on how you send people on assignment? Can you combine hybrid mobility? Can you, let's say, play between a virtual role for a period of time and then combine it with a more normal way of assignments, right, on the assignment side? So mobility, once again, is under the spotlight as a very key strategic advisor for the business and try to manage the different needs, keeping an eye also in developing the talent internationally. So for me, back to your questions, it's still very, very important to focus on international development for our talents because organizations that operate on international scale still need that. And also local skills gaps is something that, after the COVID crisis, is still not going to change. So for me, it's still very important.
No, thanks, Denny. Maybe turning to Isabel here and looking at this from a vendor perspective, and as John said at the beginning, taking over a company of 130 employees aged 28 is a crazy challenge, and respect to you for having really taken it to task. How important is this concept of developing mixed leadership in your part of the industry in which we work, in the kind of relocation companies and shipping and logistics side? Do you see it as a developing issue for you and your peers in other companies?
Yes, thank you for taking also the perspective of vendors. In my personal experience, indeed, I came to this position thanks to the family business and because it was like that in the family, but it was a really important moment also for the company because it gave us the opportunity to change a little bit the organization within the company, and this and I naturally, because probably I'm young and I'm a woman, I naturally turned it into a more mixed and diversified management team. So this is a process who took some years because it's not easy to change, even if it's pretty small organization compare maybe with other multinational organization. But still, I think it's important to give some time to organization to change the business model. And So before COVID, for me, it was already very important to have a mixed profile into my team, and it's not only about a gender question; it's also about the culture. It's about experience, and also about other question, not only gender. And after the COVID, or now with the COVID situation, I think it's even more relevant to have this organization, because you just need to think quickly. You need to be agile, and this can only, I think, through the experience I had, it gives results when you have a diversified team, and we were really lucky, I think, to have this diversified profile to manage the crisis. So yeah, I think it's more relevant. And in our business, we daily work with international profile expats, HR, and we also need to have this diversified profile to understand their needs and to be able to answer their requirements.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. I mean, I find that fascinating. I actually want to, just in the interest of time, flip it back to Ginny for one last question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So it's again on this topic of gender, and I apologies if I'm clumsy in any way with the way I asked this question, but historically I've seen GM as being a great way to develop next generation leadership talent, regardless of who they are. But well, in some ways, particularly for women, and especially as more and more more and more companies and organizations are required to have gender parity at board level. It's certainly coming, for example, in various European countries, where we see that positions have to remain open if there is no suitable woman to fill the role. But again, it's this question of budget. Can organizations continue to focus on developing all of these different aspects of D&I, as well as focusing on global mobility, or are they going to have to make some harsh choices in light of budget cuts and economic realities?
Look, David, so company that operates internationally has always put very clear the fact that if it wants to reach some level of senior managerial role, they need to have international experience. In the past and historically for women, especially in this year, in that age between 35, 45, it was quite difficult, right? So the participation to international mobility program of women at that age was quite low, and due to clearly family commitment, or the husband career, or elderly parents to look after the kids, etc. So it was quite difficult in the past. I think that to bridge that what we call the glass ceilings that requires international experience, without an assignment, it would not be possible. On the other side, a lot of company has been pushed a lot of effort into diversity and inclusiveness agenda, right? Including gender diversity, including try to raise the number of women in more senior roles, etc. Probably most of them during the COVID had to put other priority in front. That means, for example, maintain productivity, consolidated workforce capacity, etc. But pulling out completely from diversity inclusion objective would be a mistake. As you said at the beginning in your opening speech, diversity and inclusion has been proven to improve the performance of the company, and these skills will be most needed in this recovery phase, where a company will look at how to go back to work, how to rebalance, how to rebuild, how to go back into the game. And it will be, a missed opportunity to back off from all the effort that has been made up to now because of the crisis. The COVID-19 crisis has definitely exposed some of the structural flaws of our economical and social system. Hasn't created new disparity, has just created and highlighted even more critical failures. So this is an opportunity. I would turn this into a positive and say, look, this is the time where gender equality and the role, for example, of women, if we want to focus on that angle, as new leaders, it will be very relevant, even more than it was before. And it is a great opportunity now, where we are thinking about rebuilding and restarting, to try to close these gaps and try to really make a change. So I think, to your questions, I think yes, company will be losing if they will forget about their agenda on diversity and inclusion.
All I can say is thank you very much. I just wish I had another 20 minutes to continue the discussion because it's absolutely fascinating and I love this subject. I just want to say a huge thank you to you all, to Ginny, to Lindsay, to Isabel and to Vicky. Fantastic to hear your perspectives. Thank you so much for your time. And John, I'll pass it back to you at this stage.
Thank you very much indeed, David, and thank you to our panelists. Now, for the next section of Res Live 4, we're passing the baton over to our friends at Newcastle University Business School and also the Cranfield School of Management, along with Paul Bailey of RW3, who I said earlier were experts in... Well, they are experts in building high-performance cross-border teams. Now, they'll be exploring the topics of sustainability, flexibility, and resilience. What do competing pressures mean for the GM and HR agenda? And how can organizations adapt to meet the new demands? Incidentally, we will be digging into this topic in a lot more detail also in our upcoming research paper on the topic, which will be published in November 2020, and we'll be sending out to all attendees a note including a link to this survey after this event. But anyway, the first person I want to speak to then is Benjamin Bader. Over to you, Ben.
Hi, thanks, John. Hi, everybody. This is certainly interesting times, and the fact that we're doing Res Live for the fourth time now, using Zoom, having done YouTube Live and other things around show, that technology that actually has been there before, but now is really applied to pretty much anything, is a point I would like to further discuss. So, Paul, regarding technology, use of technology in this regard, what's your stance on that?
Hi, Ben. Hi, everyone. I think it's been a fascinating 6 months or so in terms of technology, and especially with regard to our role, which sort of encompasses GM, but also gets involved in aspects of virtual team development. It also spans D&I activity and also leadership. So it's been really interesting to see how all of those things have come together. And I think that sort of underscores the sort of wider role of GM that we've talked about already today, which is really interesting. And I think that there's also a case for saying, well, yeah, there is an emphasis on moving the work rather than the people. I think Dave mentioned that right at the start, and I think that's something we've seen an awful lot of. And I think there are sort of two impacts, I guess, with regard to GM on this that we've seen. So first of all, the importance of managing and facilitating, I guess, virtual work. That's across all different assignment types. Obviously, some of our clients are initiating people on a virtual basis for assignments, but obviously we're also getting involved in a lot of different activities with regard to sort of different assignment types, all of which have a virtual component. So that's a major part of the work that we've been doing with GM over the last 6 months or so. I think the other thing that has also been touched upon is inclusion and the importance of creating a diverse pipeline of talent within our organizations. So we've done an awful lot of work with our clients in that area. So it's sort of interesting to hear the sort of diverse sort of ways that people have been enacting the D&I sort of agenda. Some people obviously stepping away from it, others much more involved, and we've seen within our client base certainly an awful lot of interest in that, even within the GM segment of our sort of client base. So I think there's a massive role in technology in supporting both of those areas. Obviously, we're sort of involved in that and like to think we're at the forefront of both of those areas. But I think virtual teams and the importance of, I guess, supporting our assignments, whatever type of assignment they are, within a virtual environment is really important. It's a key criteria. And Lindsay mentioned the importance of not only selection, but also preparation. I think virtual teams and the ability to manage diverse virtual teams is going to be sort of a key core competence for expats and assignees going forward, and for all of us, in fact.
Thank you. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's very, very interesting if we look at the poll we had in the beginning, and David Enser mentioned we are kind of shifting a little bit backwards from radical change to a maybe slight change or something in between. But I think we certainly agree that the leap in technology, or maybe not leap in technology, maybe leap in using the technology that is there is going to stay to a certain extent. So I think it's very relevant. So Michael, over to you. I would like to ask you, what do you think? What should GM departments do in order to improve their operations and approaches towards a more sustainable and perhaps a more resilient GM?
Thank you, Ben and Paul. Picking up on the DI and leadership angle and grounding it in the resilience and sustainability focus of today's session, I think I would like to propose a number of broad recommendations for the GM function in order to strengthen their GM employee value proposition. So in the long term, to be still attractive to employees in sometimes complex situations like with COVID, or possibly in some sort of new normal. The first one is create resilient business and GM strategies, governance and management approaches that incorporate a robust major incident response. Okay, who knows what other major incidents are around the corner? But these incident responses need to incorporate consideration with regard to challenges that may arise from things like working at home, in isolation, or with certain health threats. So let's rethink and learn the lessons that we can today. Second is rethink your assignment patterns. External sustainability issues due to the reduction of current and future numbers of assignments and less business travel need to be planned and their effects managed. In my mind, we will return to have sustainability issues around how we deal with resources as one of the key elements of our considerations in the future. In addition, therefore, companies need to work through the implications for global operational effectiveness, for instance, as outlined for virtual teams by Paul. Okay. A third recommendation would be develop sustainable assignee working patterns. So do encourage home office work, part-time and flexi-time work, encourage virtual work, or the combination of some virtual work and some actual work abroad. My fourth recommendation would be to factor in cross-border responsibility issues. This is linking to Ginny's and Lindsay's points of D&I and so on, and you should factor those in when making staffing decisions. For example, I think it's a tremendous opportunity today to support local talent that, when you make that argument that there was a lot of global talent occupying senior leadership functions. Today is a real chance, especially the longer COVID-19 actually holds our breath, basically, to support local talent. Where assignments are used, considerations need to include how assignees can travel across borders in order to fulfill their family and other caring obligations. People are probably much more worried these days. And my last recommendation would be use responsibility and sustainability initiative as an external marketing tool and to strengthen the GM employee value proposition. Make sure that you design an attractive GM employee value proposition that appeals to millennials and other stakeholders, because the war for talent will not stop.
Excellent.
That's me then.
Points. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Paul. So now it's time for us to get into breakouts. So thank you, everybody, and over to John.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael and Ben. And Paul, you've managed to get us back on track, which is a remarkable achievement time-wise. So indeed, now we break out into our three groups. It's the chance for you all to take part in a question and discussion focused breakout groups. And at the end, each of the group's Res Forum moderators will report back with their insights. And I can just put up onto the screen behind me here what the breakout sessions are, and I'll get out of the way. There they are. Hopefully you can see that, but to remind you, group one is resilience, what does resilience in GM look like to you? And that's Jose is going to be in charge of that one. With Group 2 is sustainability. How can GM be sustainable in future on economic, environmental and practical grounds? That's Andy. And Group 3, what flexibilities might we need now and in the future to best adapt to the new global working norm? And that's David Schofield. So I hope that you all have fruitful discussions, and I will see you back here in about 20 minutes. Okay, I think we're all returning slowly but surely. I'm sorry we had a bit of a few problems, I think, there with, well, what we might describe as technical problems. And of course, as Ben was talking about the technical advantages that we've all been getting used to, we'll have also been getting used to the technical problems that go with it. And I know I was just eavesdropping on one of the breakout sessions, and I know there was a bit of a mix-up. So I'm not entirely sure who was in each, but I see, Jose, you are there, and you're looking as if you want to talk about your group. And according to my record, you should have been talking about resilience. Perhaps you can tell us what you did talk about, and hopefully you did talk about that.
Yeah, we did. We actually covered resilience and a little bit on sustainability. We thought we'd try and cover both kind of the short term and longer term kind of views. So on the resilience side, I think the view was, I think as global mobility professionals, I think we're front and center of a lot of pressures, and I think we are under pressure to meet certain business expectations around policy design and, you know, facilitating remote working across borders, which, you know, there's an expectation that these things are rather easily done, but as we all know, that's not the case. So I think we've all had to be resilient in a number of ways, both personally and professionally, over the last few months. One interesting comment was there's no experience of this situation, of course. So what are the long-term impacts of remote working? You know, that's something we need to kind of work through. And I think we're at the point where a lot of teams are under pressure and, you know, finding this situation quite difficult to deal with. And as we get into things like year end and other projects, that will continue to be a challenge. And often what we find as well is that the business goes ahead, will make certain decisions. And again, it comes back to that kind of pressure aspect of global mobility being effectively kind of dumped something to say, well, look, you go ahead and make this magic happen. And, you know, that's just putting teams under a lot of pressure. And some good comments as well about investing the time to really get behind what are the businesses trying to achieve here. You know, so that expectations can be, you know, challenged, met, and to try and get involved in the early stages of conversations, decisions as well. So that's again trying to influence and you know, to try and get ahead as much as possible to not be in difficult situations.
Great, thanks, Jose. Now, David Schofield, I know you made a guest appearance in the wrong group for a brief moment, but you were certainly down to talk about flexibility. So perhaps I can turn to you to give us an overview and takeaways from what you discussed in your group.
We had comments that what organizations were trying to do was to set some kinds of, what was the word someone used, thresholds and boundaries around it. So in other words, it's a long way from being a free-for-all. And that was not in the sense of overstructuring things, but a recognition of another important word, which is risk. And that's risk around tax issues, work permits and things like that, and strategic risk as well. So these are not words to be afraid of. It's interesting that organizations are trying to manage them and set reasonable guidelines and structures, if you like. One thing that rang a bell with me, with my very long experience in global mobility, was several organizations talking about the potential interest in GECs, global employment companies, the kind of bodies that can sit at a supranational level and cope with the fact that people are working in different locations and are not tied to the one particular owning company. It's an idea that's been around a long time. I thought it was interesting that it was coming back. Interesting, maybe there are different messages from different kinds of organizations, financial services organizations and professional services, keen to get people back to the office. Some of the creative arts organizations, less keen on that. And so we are perhaps seeing horses for courses and people operating in different ways. That's enough from me on flexibility from my two groups.
Our main discussion evolved around kind of companies embracing new ways of working, and how authentic is that, or is it just a kind of sort of weasel words, so to speak, based purely by the financials? And I kind of posed this sort of slightly controversial question that I thought there was an element of both. I think there's a practical reality, which is cost savings. Ginny came in very helpfully and talked about, why wouldn't companies embrace the new ways of working if it's going to be more productive for employees and more attractive for employees? And we dovetailed into, will that be a sort of a thing like an EVP? Will it be a brand differentiator in the end, in terms of who you choose to work for? And I think the conclusion was, the ultimate concluding point, John, was that it's a direction of travel now. Things are being accelerated towards a certain path pre-COVID, which was towards more flexibility. So we're definitely well down that path. It remains to be seen whether we'll fully remain at the current levels of flexibility, or whether we'll land sort of somewhere in the middle, which is more flexibility than before, but still a level of office presenteeism. My concluding view was that in many ways this is shaped by company culture. So if a company is more locally focused and has a face-to-face culture, then it probably will still require that. But if it's more like an EY, like Ginny's organisation, or the organisation I work with, General Electric, flexibility is a thing. It's what you do. And the final thing, sorry, I remembered as we were talking, was how do you create corporate culture when you've got a virtual organisation? And where we landed really strongly, and the lady from Disney, sorry, I can't remember your name, really nailed it, which is it's all about quality of leadership and different types of leadership now coming into the fore. So that was our concluding discussion, and it's exciting, but it's very much an emerging thread and emerging ideas that we're observing, and it's an exciting time.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to all of you, and to you, David Schofield, to give us your key takeaways of what we have been talking about throughout this edition of Res Forum Live.
I'll just give one that really struck me, and then I'll hand over to David Enns if he's back online. I think he is. The strength of feeling that global mobility has a strong role as a strategic enabler in organisations came over to me strikingly and encouragingly. A number of our speakers said that, whether it was in terms of value proposition that Michael Dickman was talking about, Lindsay was talking about embedding D&I in organisations, and that GM had a great role in doing that. So I found that personally quite a strong and positive message. David E., there'll be a couple of things at least that you want to bring out before we close.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me again now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sounding good now.
Very good. Yeah, there were a couple of things I think that came out to me from the whole course of today. Firstly, I loved what Vicky said from Adidas, as she would call it, at the beginning of this session. We talk about attracting diverse and attracting and retaining diverse talent, but that's all well and good. But then you have to listen to them, and you have to take note of what they're saying, and as a leadership, be prepared to confront yourselves, your preconceived views in your organisation. And I think that was a really powerful thing for me. Another thing that has come out throughout all of this is this sense of a returning optimism, but at the same time, not losing, as we return to whatever the new normal is, not missing out on the opportunity that we have to make some very fundamental changes. There were two huge themes that came through for me there. I think I'm out of time, so at this point, I'll put it straight back to you, John.
Great, thank you very much indeed. So that's all we've got time for this edition of Res Forum Live. A final thank you to you all for participating, and a special mention to Ken Scott for his invaluable work behind the scenes. And Ken will be following up for your feedback on this session as always. But from me, it's goodbye and stay safe.